Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first Instagram Live of our conversations about color. Thanks so much for joining. Rahat, Zamir, Sabine, Hafsa, Samia, Sireen, Manal. So nice to see you all. Make sure that you write in any questions that you have. And I'm really excited to start this off with all of you today. And hopefully this will continue to grow and we'll continue to heal and have really much needed important conversations. A little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Uzma Sayed. I'm a first generation Indian Muslim American infectious disease physician in New York, in the Big Apple right here. So any of you from New York, wave and say hello, and really excited to have you guys joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and invite in our guest speaker for today. I'm very excited. But in the meantime, I will tell you a little bit more about myself. Let's see here. Let's find our guest speaker today. So excited that she's going to be joining us. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. As you know, I'm very much an advocate of medicine and infectious diseases. I often post quite a bit about ID and my career, and that's because given the current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in, I like to talk about that frequently to educate the public and to really keep you all up to speed on what's going on with the latest advances and the latest literature out there, so that we're all well informed and in the loop. And being on the front lines in New York has been quite an experience, so I like to share that with all of you. But I also have a lot of side hustles that some of you may be aware of. I'm quite passionate about the youth, and I founded a 501c3 organization called Alinus, which focuses on career development for high school students via mentorship. And it's been really an exciting journey for all of us, including the students. I also have a lot of other passion projects. I'm involved in interfaith initiatives, a lot of community activism, and humanitarian work. And that's really why we're having this conversation today. I think it's really important that we continue this conversation today and so many more days going forward. So let's see if we have our guest of honor joining us. Hi, Sojourning Life. Soul 5688 has joined us as well. Hello. At any point, feel free to send your questions, your comments. I can see all the waves here, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of your questions and have a very important conversation. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you? Dr. Qaali, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Uzma. I really appreciate you. I'm trying to get this situated. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Take your time. We are so excited to be starting this with you. You know, I couldn't have thought of a better person to really have this conversation with. You have been a leader in so many ways. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today, and you've really been a role model for not just women, not just adults, but for the youth, for children, for people all over the world. So I'm honored that you're here with me today. I'm honored to call you a dear friend, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. And I hope that people will really grow from this experience and take something away from this today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for engaging with this conversation. You know, starting off with, you know, instead of the going back and forth on social media, to actually sit down and discuss these heavy topics.
Absolutely. So for people who don't know, I just want to say right off the bat that Dr. Qaali Hussein is a really accomplished board certified trauma surgeon. So, she's very, very accomplished and qualified, mashallah. And I'm going to let her, I would like to start the conversation off because we have a lot to discuss. And I think the most important thing is that we have to address the elephant in the room. And so I want to start off right away by, letting everybody know a little bit about you. So if you would kindly share your background a little bit with everyone so that we, all get to hear your wonderful background and your accolades and your accomplishments.
Okay. I'll try not to dwell on this too much, but my name is Dr. Qaali Hussein. I am a trauma surgeon. I board certified in general surgery as well as surgical critical care. I've been practicing for about 6 years now, and I'm originally from Somalia. I was born there. We left because of the civil war. So my family stayed in Kenya for a little bit, and then we came to the States in the early 90s. And so I grew up in Texas. I did all of my schooling from medical school all the way, from elementary school all the way to my fellowship training in Texas. And the other interesting thing about me is I'm also, I'm Somali, so I like big families. I had 6 kids, and I had them all during my residency training in general surgery and onto my fellowship.
That's amazing. That is fantastic. And, I personally knew that about you, but I want everyone else to know that about you because it really, our background, our childhood, our journey, and our current status, really shapes who we are as people. So I think it's really important for people to know that about you and, essentially how you got to where you are today. So I wanted to know a little bit briefly about your path to medicine, and I think this is really important as a female of color, as a Muslim American woman. When did you decide that you wanted to pursue medicine? Did you have, or any of your family members, your parents in the medical field? What were your influences?
Yeah, so I've always been curious about how, the human body works and how, when people get sick, why they take medications, how they work. I've always been inquisitive about that kind of stuff. And so I did have early exposure to medicine because one of my aunts is a doctor. She practiced in Somalia as a family physician. And so I used to go to her clinics. And so that was my first exposure. And then when we were leaving, I was exposed to trauma. My grandmother was shot during the war. Alhamdulillah, she survived to make it, and to live for a very long time afterwards. But I was one of the people who, held pressure to her wounds as she was bleeding. So that had an impact on me as far as my path into trauma. When I started doing, my surgery rotation during medical school, that was the one field where I felt like I had this instant connection of, I've been here before. I know this is something I can, physically do to fix someone who's hurt, who's on the verge of death. So yeah, that's been my journey into medicine.
Wow, that's amazing. What an amazing story. Now, how old were you when you went through that experience with your aunt?
So when I was younger, we used to go visit families. And so when I was 5, 6, 7, I used to always, see my aunt practicing. But the incident with my grandmother happened when I was 7 years old.
So early on, at a very young age, you had the exposure to medicine, and then you had that traumatic experience with your grandmother, unfortunately, also at a very young age. And so that kind of ingrained, in you, so this, affinity for medicine. And then once you were in that situation again, your sort of like fight or flight reflexes came on, and you said that this is, what you were meant to do. And that's amazing. Now, as a female in medicine, I can relate that there's a lot of challenges for us. We've come a long way, especially in the United States. We have a lot more female medical students now that are really, women are really well represented now in medicine than were there previously. But even that being the case, there are many fields in medicine that are underrepresented by females. And surgery is one of those notorious fields where, it's mostly male dominated. And I know there's a lot of challenges for women, wanting to pursue a career in surgery, let alone, a minority woman, a visibly Muslim woman in hijab. And I know some of these challenges you've experienced personally, and I know you are really the epitome of resilience, in my opinion. You've dealt with some really difficult challenges throughout your journey in your life, but also in your course and your path of medicine and the medical field and your journey in your career. And you talk about this often. And, I'd just like the audience to really hear about your personal experiences during medical school, rotations, residency, even leading up to, in medicine, we have this hierarchy where we're always sort of at the bottom of the totem pole, and then we climb up. We're a first year medical student, we graduate, then we're an intern, then we graduate, then we are, a first year fellows, and we graduate, then we get a job, and we're, the newbie essentially. So at every level in medicine, we're expected, we have to sort of start over again. And that brings a whole set of challenges, every single time, especially when you're sort of the underdog and you have so many things against you when you're in an industry that's underrepresented by, people like you. So if you could just tell us about your personal experiences during that whole journey, even up until today, and how you dealt with that, how you, survived all of that, how you became resilient, how you overcame all of that, and where you are today as a result of those.
Yeah. So I specifically talk about, the the difficulties in the journey for a reason, because it's easy to come here and say, I've accomplished this, I've accomplished that, but you don't learn much from success. You learn a lot more from failures, right? And so all the points in my journey where the system is designed with a lot of blocks, a lot of stop signs, right? From undergrad to college, from undergrad to medicine, I was told I couldn't get into medical school. I got into medical school. I was told, I wanted to be a surgeon. I was told I couldn't be a surgeon. I got into surgery. I wanted to have kids, and I started having kids. I was told, as a mother, you're not meant to be a surgeon, right? There wasn't even a maternity leave policy, right? So instead of figuring out how to take someone who doesn't look like the model, surgeon or the model physician, instead of figuring out how to change the system to be better accommodating to everybody, the go-to answer is no, you do not belong here, right? Find other things, find family-friendly fields, find, fields that are better for you because you're a woman, because you're a minority, because you won't get, as much pushback, right? So the concept of change is always applied to the individual, right? Like I was told, in order for you to pursue surgery, right, the first thing before I even started having kids was you have to take off your hijab, right? Yeah. I wasn't even like my rotation when I came to do surgery, when I came to do my surgery rotation as a third year medical student, one of the oldest medical schools in the country, okay, in the state of Texas, had no policy when it came to wearing a hijab in the OR, right? So instead of figuring out how do we accommodate someone who's never been here, the answer was no, you do not belong here, right? So, and the fact that, I'm a Black woman always gets into, gets brought in somehow. Like, oh, there aren't many women that look like you, right?
Right.
So to me, the reason I speak about all these difficulties is because the institution is set up to where change is not, is not easily accomplished, right? The easiest answer is to tell the individual you don't belong, right? Systems do not change easily. You have to get in there. You have to force the system to change. And that's been my experience. Every single thing that I had to overcome, it was me pushing the system. Maternity leave policy, the answer I received was, oh, once you have the kid, you're not going to come back to work. I came back to work. I had another kid. It was like, oh, now you're done. You're not going to make it to the end of this residency. I kept coming back to work. And guess what happened? They had to come up with a maternity leave policy to accommodate any residents who wanted to have kids in the future as juniors, right? So, hijabs in the OR. I wasn't giving up. I had to stay there. So they had to come up with ways to accommodate me. So one of the things that I, try and stress at all times is this whole diversity and inclusion movement that we have in medicine, right? Our focus is on women in medicine, advancing, the place of women in medicine, getting into, advanced positions within academia, right? Yes, diversity is good, but when you say we want to be included, right? When you talk about inclusion, you're being told to come and fit into the system and have the system stay the same, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not interested in being
Yep.
invited to and included in a system that does not want to accommodate people who look like me, right? So
Absolutely.
when I talk about these things and when I talk to young people, what I want to stress and what I want to teach is I don't want you to aim for mediocrity, right? I don't want you to aim for I want to be included. I want to teach how do you become a leader and how do you lead the change in that field, right? And what's happening
Absolutely.
right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, how George Floyd was killed in front of the whole world, right?
Yep.
And what happened to him is a trauma, right?
Absolutely.
From my
Absolutely.
personal, as a physician, as a trauma surgeon,
Hmm.
what I see is trauma being inflicted to Black men and nothing being done about it. And we as physicians not speaking up and saying, no, this should not be happening. And we should be speaking up against it. But because it happens
Absolutely.
to be a racial issue, because it happens to affect Black men, because the Black Lives Matter movement is seen as a political thing, we stay quiet, right? Our medical community is silent, and we're not saying anything about it. And so that is why I am vocal, because what I see what I see happening is what I've seen all along, right?
Exactly.
The system accommodates, the system does not accommodate all of us.
Absolutely.
It forces us to change. It forces us to look at some of the comments. I want to know what he was doing before that happened. We want to know what George Floyd was doing before. So basically, we're blaming him for his own death. That's
Right.
what we're doing.
Right.
So
Terrible.
that's why when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we don't need to be
Right.
included in a system
Right.
that does not support us, in a system that does not see value in the lives of black people.
Absolutely. I think you highlighted that so well with your example of your personal journey through medicine. I think it just shows that, the system essentially is broken, whether you look at the medical system or any other system in the country. And how do we, get effective change for us to go on? We sort of reached a breaking point. I mean, we are in a pandemic of all sorts in this country. We've got the novel virus pandemic, we've got the misinformation pandemic, we've got the racism pandemic. We are, everything is coming up, and we just can't, fathom that this is actually happening. And it's been happening for so long.
It's
And
been
what can
happening.
we do?
It's been happening for so long. Everybody's getting enraged right now, because I mean the black community has had enough. We've had enough, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
I'm, when my husband leaves and he says he's getting stopped by a cop, I worry more for him when he gets stopped by a cop than I worry for myself. Why?
Yeah.
There is a difference in sometimes how women are
Yep.
treated versus men. As a black man,
Of
you are seen
course.
as a threat,
Of
right? my
course.
my
Yep.
son my oldest son, he's 9 years old now. I had this talk with him. I had the talk that all black mothers have with their kids when my kid was 7 years old.
Wow.
You know why?
It's a tough,
We were
yeah.
in a grocery store and he was playing around, and they play video games, so he was pretending to do this, to shoot something. And there was a white man standing behind him with his phone out, looking at him as if my son was a threat. 7 years
Wow.
old.
Wow.
7 years old. I had to distract him and call him, to my side. We left fairly quickly. And I had to have that talk with him in the parking lot, and
Wow.
and
And
violate his.
what was his reaction? Was he able to even
He,
grasp anything that you were saying at that time?
he cried. He cried, and I cried, because that is our reality. That is our daily reality,
It's
right? So
heartbreaking.
when people look at it as, this is a political movement, and our physician colleagues don't want to discuss this as the public health problem it is,
Right.
then it is up to
Absolutely.
us. So this is where, I don't need you to, include me in
Right.
any diversity. Like, I
Right.
need to be the lead in
Right.
making sure that this does. Right. So unless we speak up, unless we lead, and demand change, then do not expect a system that has upheld this for many, many years to come to the rescue, because they will not.
Absolutely. So, speaking of your son that you were just mentioning, I'm curious because I know you've moved around, not just between countries, but even within the US. Your children, I'm sure they were all different ages and at different stages when you moved from one state to another. I just wonder, as a family, and specifically for your children, how were their experiences in different regions? Did you feel like certain, and again, the moves that you had, I'm not entirely sure if they were specifically for career reasons or for personal reasons, but I'm sure that has a lot to do with how your children have grown up and how they are continuing to grow up and how you've evolved as an adult. And I'm just curious to hear about your experiences as a family, as a unit in different regions. Did you find that there were different challenges in different parts of the country?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in Texas, I've lived in Florida, and now I'm currently in Arizona. And
Mhm.
so, being called the N word, I've been called the N word at work multiple
Wow.
times. I've been called a terrorist. You know, every, version of, being dehumanized for who I am, it's rampant within our medical community. It's rampant within our community. So we try and shelter our kids as much as we can. We try and stay within our, Somali communities. We're very closely knit, and we have a huge family. So, you can only shelter your kids so much when, this kind of racism is so pervasive now that, it is endangering, the lives of our children, the lives of our people. um, it's important that we have, these conversations that our kids are way too young to have, but it could potentially save their lives. So, the lives of Black kids are completely different than the lives of many other kids in this country, right? And
Absolutely.
I want to specify the difference between what I keep, referring um, to this with the terminology of Black people, right? We
Hmm.
often
Yep.
lump everybody together as, people of color, but
Yep.
I think we have to be careful with using that terminology when talking about this specific these
Topic.
specific incidents, because when you
Absolutely.
blanket, uh, people of color, all people of color are not treated the same. Black people are
Absolutely.
treated much worse than any other group in this country, than any other group. Okay, if
Absolutely. We've
someone
seen
mistook
that.
me, yeah, I mean, if someone mistook me for for a non-African American, they thought I was, of some other heritage. They treat me differently, right? But as soon as they see my husband, or someone who's, obviously, they can tell, the color, they act differently. Within our communities, within our Muslim community, there is anti-Black sentiment. Okay, so I remember going to the masjid when I was younger, and I did not like going. Right, it's a house of worship, but there was clear discrimination amongst from other people of color, from other Muslims. Why? Because there is clear-cut anti-Black sentiment within many, many communities,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, yes, we talk about, minorities, everybody lumps them together, but what's happening, as is evident by all the protests, what is happening is Black people, African Americans, Black people, not people of color, Black people are systematically being attacked and being killed on the streets. And that's something that needs to be acknowledged by everybody.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. I mean, and the fact of the matter is things, it's gotten to a point where it's in broad daylight and it's just as if, this is just, just carry on. And everyone has sort of reached that breaking point now where enough is enough. And you brought up a really good point about the anti-Black sentiment in many different communities. And I think this is something that we really have to acknowledge as well. This is something that I really feel is the elephant in the room in our Muslim American communities, because we see this, you oftentimes people will think, well, even in your own Somalian community, you may have this as well. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of prejudice even within our own communities. There's so much hierarchy. There's, social prejudice, and there's, lots of disparities and lots of reason for unrest within our communities. But I feel like even in the Muslim American communities, unfortunately, there's so much prejudice and so much anti-Black sentiment that really I think we have to get to the root of the cause. Why are we not progressing? Because we have to look within ourselves and our own communities first and then preach outwards.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really important, that there's so much value for this in Islam, and there's so much value for, equality in Islam. And I think we have come steered so far away from that over the years, and we really need to get back into the
Yeah.
zone and into the focus and see, and be leaders of example. Start with your own household first. Start with your
Yep.
own family first.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
anti-Blackness is so entrenched that there's an entire market that benefits off of this. Okay. So colorism, right? Skin bleaching. That
yeah,
is the root cause of that. People putting chemicals on their faces just so that they can be lighter, they can be light skinned. That is rooted in anti-Black sentiment. That's where it comes from,
absolutely,
right? You want fair
absolutely.
skin, right? I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
if you're a member of some of these Muslim, groups where posts are, things are being posted about, someone's looking for, a wife or something, and they want
Oh,
fair
goodness.
skinned,
Yeah. Yes. Oh my
fair
gosh. I
skinned.
cringe every time I hear that. The requirements should be fair complexion. I mean, it just drives me crazy when I hear that.
Right? And apparently we're supposed to be, Muslims,
Right.
right? And we're
Right.
supposed to be
Right.
equal, and we're,
Equal.
and I think some of these are, even physicians. So, your physicians who are supposed to uphold,
Educated. Yep.
very educated and uphold, high morals,
Yep.
are discriminating blanket in front of us. Like, right?
Absolutely.
We're not even hiding it. We're not even hiding
Yep.
it.
Yep. And we have to work to fix that problem, and it's only going to get better if we collectively put in the effort, in our own households, in our own communities,
Yep.
call it out like it is, because we can't expect the world to be a better place if we don't make the efforts ourselves. So I wanted to ask you specifically about your children. Besides having those, conversations, those tough conversations that you've had with them, how do you teach them specifically to be resilient? And how have you had, examples where other, community members, whether, within or rather outside of your community, have, engaged, with, kindness and, specifically with your children, where, we are using, our children are really our future, and the youth is really what's going to drive, us out of this, dark place that we're in. And, I'm a very optimistic person. I mean, I see, I'm a realist and I see the negativity in the world, but I'm always optimistic that, we can make change. And, you know, if it is even one person that you encounter, that you change their mind and you open up their mind and open their horizons, that's going to have a significant effect on society. Have you had any interactions like this specifically, where your kids, some of your kids' friends, or, you know, your friends have spoken up, have, you know, been there for you, and they've become resilient, your children have become resilient as a process?
Um, so I teach my kids, you know, resilience. On a daily. Uh, so, you know, even at a young age, we try and instill, you know, the values of the importance of hard work, the importance of treating others, you know, with the same respect that you would want for yourself. And that, you know, you pick and choose, you know, which things to go after, and when to, you know, use your better judgment. So, you know, we teach them that, you know, they shouldn't be starting anything and they should be treating everybody with respect. But when their rights are violated, you know, we encourage them and tell them that they do have rights, that they can
Yeah.
speak up for themselves, that they can stand up for themselves, right? And the difference between right and wrong, right?
Right.
So when they are wronged, right, they come and tell me, and we advocate for them. When we belittle our you know, things that are important to our kids, or when we tell them that's just how the world is, then how are we going to help them change anything, right?
So important. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we, I mean, we do this, you know, that's, you know, just how we handle things in our household. And actually my daughter has at one point, you know, come and talk to me about, one of her friends being bullied, at school, for, you know, for something minor. You know, she was a little different,
Hmm.
and because of the lessons that we teach them, the fact that
Hmm.
they should speak up not only on for themselves but for others, she
Yeah.
was able to advocate for her, and you know, talk to the
Wow.
teachers, and you know, put an end to the bullying. So I think these are lessons that start very, very early, right? It's not something that you
Yep.
wait and talk
Yep.
about when they're teenagers, and you know, and it
Yep.
may be too late.
Yep, absolutely. So you mentioned, you know, I mean, those are amazing, amazing points. And I think you're really, once again, leading by example in your own household as well. And unfortunately, you mentioned how you had to have that difficult conversation with your son when he was only 7. But, you know, we see our kids are exposed to so much now. You know, it's very different. Their childhood is very different from our childhood. You know, with the advancement of technology and everything at their fingertips, they're able to see the world like it is, essentially. And we know that stereotypes start at a very young age. We know that implicit bias, racism, all of this is happening, you know, from very, very young ages, that children unfortunately are exposed to. So I think the right thing is what you're doing, having these important conversations with them at a very young age so that they know what's right and what's wrong. But how else do you think, you know, we can deal with these stereotypes and these implicit biases, whether it be for children or for adults? You know, how can we be better equipped to break this mold and, you know, really not have this vicious cycle continue?
So I think one of the most important things is what we're doing right now is we're having a conversation. We're actually talking about this. And when you talk about something, it means you're acknowledging it. You're acknowledging the fact that there is racism. You're acknowledging the fact that there's anti-Black sentiment within almost every, community.
Yeah.
And then number two is educate. You educate yourself, right? If you are not a Black person, you know, do not, you know, there's a lot of burden on Black people, right? Every time I see a killing,
Yeah.
you know, there's high anxiety, and there's a concern that if this doesn't get better, you know, is my child going to be next? Is my husband going to be next? Is my brother going to be next? Right? So we have that heightened anxiety every single time this happens, and almost every other day,
Yeah.
almost every day, right? So the burden on educating the public and educating every individual should not be placed on the people that are suffering, right? There are many,
100%.
many books. There are multiple books that talk about this,
Yeah.
right? So there's one really good book called, excuse me, there's a really good book called, How to Be Anti-Racist. um, by, I forget his name, but this by a professor, how to be anti-racist, right? It's not enough to be, oh, I'm not a racist. How do you become anti-racist? How do you stand up against racism, right? Read that book. White Fragility is another book. Read that book. Educate yourself on the issues at hand and learn and figure out how can you be, part of the change that puts an end to the systematic discrimination and killing of Black people, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So if we continue to keep ignoring, these issues and saying, oh, it's a Black people problem, it's a political, Black Lives, Matter is a political movement. I don't want to get into politics. I rarely ever talk about politics, right? Our president is saying, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. He's ordering, he's worsening racial tension and ordering the killing of Americans, right?
Right, inciting violence.
But as soon as you talk about that, you know what? You lose half the people. Why? Because they're politically, they're so ingrained in their political ideology that you can't even have a conversation, right? Absolutely. So there's no point, like for me personally, there's really no point in wasting time on politics and picking sides, right? This is not a political issue. The lives of Black people is not a political issue, right? From within the medical field, and this is where I feel very, very strongly, and there are a lot of people that respond to my posts, when I talk about certain things. There's been a significant decline in the number of comments on all of my posts recently since I started talking about Black Lives Matter.
Wow, that is really upsetting.
Significant drop.
Would you say from the medical community or from just in general?
From the medical community, from other communities that are non, I think Twitter is more of the medical community. In Facebook and other platforms, it's significant decline. Why? Because it's an uncomfortable topic. It's political. Right? So
that's the whole thing. It cannot be political, as you said. It has nothing to do with that. We're talking about people's lives here,
Exactly.
And it's really, and as you said, it is really a public health issue. And I think the medical community is the first that should be standing up. I know my society, the Infectious Disease Society of America, is putting together a whole statement that's going to be going out tomorrow. I know the Emergency Medical Society had put out a statement as well. But I think, it's a starting point. I think there's obviously a lot more that needs to be done. But it's a starting point for people to finally, it's not enough to just be complacent. You cannot be silent. You cannot, it's just, we're past that point now. And I think that's really important. And I think for us, in healthcare, what better platform or avenue than to advocate for the health and lives of innocent people? That's really what it's about.
Exactly. And you know what? I didn't sign up, to become, a physician just, to take care of one or two patients, my platform is not limited to my direct patient care, right? Yeah. Like, for example, I do trauma, right? So we take care of patients who are directly injured, right? Whether it's they're in a motorcycle accident, motor vehicle accident, they're shot, fall, whatever, right? We treat them, we take care of them, they leave, right? But from all the data that we gather, if we see a trend that there's, more, a significant increase in motorcycle accidents recently, significant increase in gunshot wounds, do we just sit on that data and say, oh, too bad, so sad, I guess people are making the right choices? Or do we go and say, okay, we're seeing an increased incidence of injuries and death from this particular thing. We need to do something about it so we can decrease the number of people that are dying or are being affected by this injury, right? We do that already. We do that. That is called trauma outreach and injury prevention. We do that. When the whole, gun control, where, a lot of physicians started, speaking up against gun violence. What did the NRA say? This is not your lane, right? And what did we say as physicians? This is our lane,
Yeah.
right? We have
Yeah.
Black people being killed, right?
Right.
Neck restraints being applied. I can't even order a wrist restraint at the hospital without going through multiple hoops. And I have to justify why I'm using wrist restraints every 24 hours.
Right.
Why? Because they're a danger. They're a danger to patient safety. We regulate how physicians, people who are trained to take care of patients, many years of training. We restrict how they use wrist restraints. Yet we're training cops to go and strangle people on the streets without any oversight. Without any oversight. Tell me how that is not, an avenue for us to look at it from an injury prevention standpoint.
Absolutely.
I don't even want to talk about politics. This is an injury. There's a significantly increased number of deaths in Black men from cops sitting and crushing their necks, sitting on putting a knee on their necks and crushing them. Right? That causes an injury, asphyxiation, and they die. That is an injury. They can't even get into the hospital, quickly enough for us to even intervene. Right? So what is our only avenue of preventing that? Injury prevention. We have to advocate for injury prevention. We have to outlaw those practices. Right? And for physicians to be silent on this topic is to be complicit.
Right. And I think this goes back into your previous comment that you said so poignantly before about how, as Black Americans, the burden is on you always to be the ones to speak out. And, in fact, you guys are the ones that are dealing with the trauma, the constant trauma of the lives lost. And this is really an opportunity for everybody to speak out, including the healthcare professionals, and to really, use this time wisely to make this change in order to save lives. And I think that's really where we have to go from here.
That exactly, and that's what I keep harping on Med Twitter. And I want to use this as an example of why I'm very vocal on social media about increasing diversity within all these different fields. Right now, I've been focusing on women in medicine and young women, and especially Muslim women and things like that. But this example of Black physicians being the ones to speak up and ask for change and ask for advocacy highlights the fact that the way you change systems is from within, and it's by people who are directly affected by it, right? Systems will not change. Systems will never change to accommodate. Systems will, it is so much easier, path of least resistance. It is so much easier for systems to stay the way they are than push for change. Is really, really hard, right? Change is really hard. So in order for these systems to change, it has to be driven by people who are directly affected by it. And it has to come from the inside. Someone who knows the ins and outs of how the system works and where the low-hanging fruit is. Right? To me, this is clear cut. This is easy. Right? This is, you see someone dying from an injury and it's repeated over and over and over and over. Right? And it's causing death. That is increased mortality. It's a public health issue. It's a directly traumatic issue. Right? We have systems in place that deal with trauma, with injury prevention. So why is the trauma community not as riled up and upset as I am?
Right.
Right? And this is why I encourage. I'm in the middle of developing, something that have been wanting to work on for a very long time. Right? We don't need to be included in anything. We don't need to be invited to a table. I want to have a group of young people whose sole goal is to get into these fields and to lead change. I don't want them to shoot for mediocrity. I don't want them to be included and have a seat at the table. I want them to shoot to be at the head of that table. and to be the
Absolutely.
leaders in their fields and to change, because that is what needs to happen, right? I didn't go into
Absolutely.
I didn't go into academics because I wanted to do this, right? If I was in academics right now, I specifically did not go into academics because I would be censored,
Yep.
right? If I wanted to talk about this right now, my academic department would say, no, that's too political for us. That doesn't align with our, with our motto. We don't talk
Right.
about these things, right?
Right.
And there is and there's a lot of evidence on Twitter about repercussions of physicians speaking
Mm-hmm.
out. Right? I
Right.
remain independent solely for this reason, so that I can speak my
Right.
mind and I can say this is how medicine is. Right? This is
Right.
our reality, and we are in a position to have to use
Right.
our voice for good and
Right.
to implement change. And that's what I wanted. That's what I want young people to look at, from here.
Absolutely.
Yes, you may have to go through gruesome training, whether it's in medicine, law, law enforcement, the judicial system, whatever system that you want to get into, because this is a whole systems issue, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Whatever
Yep.
system that the way to get to it, it's not to be, included and to be given an opportunity. It's to find out, how do you maneuver through the system to get to where
Right.
you want to get to, and then how do you
Yep.
use that platform. That's,
Yep.
we need a
That's it.
leadership. We need a leadership um, platform for young people, for minorities, underrepresented minorities in
Absolutely.
almost every field, in not only how to get into these fields, but how to lead these fields and
Lead.
how to actually bring about change.
Absolutely. That's the only way we're going to see changes, when we have more people in leadership in the establishment. I always say that you have to be part of the establishment to enact, substantial change.
Yep.
So, I've seen this before in my path as well. I always felt that, I had ran for school board and things like that just because I wanted to be part of this system. And we've seen that characteristically in every different industry, in every different career. So I think that is the goal, grooming the next generation of leaders, making sure that they know, and we should not let them think that their goals are only short-lived, that, they need to know that the sky is the limit. We know it's a difficult world that we live in. We know that there's a lot of challenges, but we are going to all work together to
Mm-hmm.
overcome those challenges.
Yeah.
People such as yourself have, a perfect example of overcoming these challenges, and, and being resilient and being accomplished. So, we need more role models like yourself for our future generations and for our leaders, so that we can really have effective change, and have a better future for our children and for future generations to come.
Yeah.
That's the only way. And I have to tell you that, I want to thank you again for everything that you've been doing, for all of us, whether we're in healthcare or any other industry, as parents, as, children, as, community members. I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've been doing. And, we're here for you. And, I know that people are here with us today because they want to learn, and it's a difficult time for all of us in this country right now. And there are so many people that just want to do something. They want to help, and they don't know how to help. And I think by joining us today, they're able to get some information, but I'd like to also leave them with some more information from you, especially. I know you had mentioned a book before, or two books, but if you have any other recommendations for adults and children, what might be good resources for parents to really start having these conversations with their kids. Kids are on social media. The news obviously is covering everything all the time. And, they have access to all this information, but I think the conversation needs to start in the home. So if you have recommendations for where people can start from to have those conversations, because obviously, school is one thing, and schools are on hold right now, but it's more important for that information to come immediately from the household, because it's going to be a lot more effective than, any other source.
Yeah, so I think there was a link that I sent you that had a compilation of a
Mm-hmm.
lot of resources. Yeah, there are
Yes.
many books, and there are many books that are that are written specifically for kids to talk about, racism, and just race in general. So I would link that,
Great.
or
Perfect. I'll
these are
share that
both.
with everybody. Yep.
It's too numerous for me to name them right now, but I think, like I said before, educating yourself and your children about this reality that, that a lot of, that Black people live with on a daily basis is going to be extremely important if racism is to change in any way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, racism is taught. I mean, you can see it in kids, right? It's something that is taught at home. So unless we teach our kids how to recognize that and how to be anti-racist, then this is just going to continue, forever. So that is one thing that I would say is educate yourself, educate your kids. And to be an ally, I think a lot of times we don't recognize these things within our fields because it doesn't happen to us, it doesn't affect us. But there are a lot of times where you know Black people are not necessarily given equal opportunity. They have to work twice as hard to be considered just the same. So to be an ally is to recognize the work and give due credit to your fellow your colleagues, your Black colleagues, and recognize that the system is rigged against them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in residency where I would constantly get grilled over minor complications, and be blamed for causing a patient's wound infection when there's clear cut underlying causes. But a colleague would poke a hole in somebody's spleen, and it would be oh, what's the incidence of that happening? Oh yeah, that's understandable, don't do it again, right? So
Yeah.
we're under so much more scrutiny that we are
Right.
forced to be excellent 24/7, right?
Yeah.
And that excellence and that accomplishment is not credited fairly, because you have to do it in order to just be considered competent,
Right.
right?
Right.
Our excellence is
Yeah.
considered merely competence because we have to bridge that gap,
Yeah.
right?
So not
So
acknowledged. And I
recognize
think
that.
it's up to people to speak up when they see this, disparity. It's not enough to just go about your ways anymore. You have to sort of call it out for what it is. And,
Yeah,
that's the only way that it's going to really go away, or
yeah,
hopefully go away.
exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Qaali Hussein, thank you so much again for joining us today. And I hope this is just the first of many conversations. And I can tell you that we really appreciated your time, and we are with you 100%. And, we look forward to, building a better future together for all of us and for our children.
Thank you, Uzma. Thank you so much for all you do, and for not being just an ally, but there's another terminology called accomplice, meaning that someone who's not just willing to stand by your side, but willing to do the work. And I see you as someone who's willing to learn, willing to educate yourself and the community, and willing to do the work. So I appreciate you, and I really thank you for that. There are a lot of things that there are a lot of projects that I've been working on when it comes to dealing with the discrimination that I've been putting off for a long time. But I inshallah in the near future will be sharing some of that work with you, because I think the future, right now, once the protests and everything are over, that's when the work begins, and the work begins with our youth, with creating future leaders who will change the system, and that's the
Yeah.
work that I want to do. So I thank you for starting this conversation, and for doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you soon. Take care.
All right, assalamu alaikum.